What are we going to talk about today? About the principle of sovereign equality, about its roots, concepts in political thinking and its legal reasoning, about the UN Charter and UN practice, because as far as you can see, even, or especially nowadays, this is something that might give you a question, is there something like sovereign equality really applicable nowadays? And actually, that was the question that I got from you, Professor, during the previous conference at the end of my presentation at that time. So is it really the situation nowadays that we can claim there is something like the principle of sovereign equality applicable in international law? And I'll have a look at it. And then, because of the aim of the research of the whole research group, I'll turn my attention to sovereign equality in the era of international organizations. And I hope to come together with you to a conclusion about the importance of the basic principle, not only of international law, and that is pacta sunt servanda. I can see also students here, but to tell the truth, it was very inspiring for me to get the reviews for my chapter, asking whether the Westphalian system, as it is usually considered, is the root, is the establishment of the nowadays systems of international, interstate relations. And I think it is. Why do I claim so? So if I ask a student during an exam on public international law, what is a state? You usually, and I would usually say, of course, it is a unit with territorial personal aspect and also the authority to govern internally and externally. And this principle, especially for students, it is well established within the legal framework of international law. Nevertheless, the questions when it was established has become a topic of certain controversy within last years, because originally it was the Westphalian system in 17th century that has been declared to be the beginning, the establishment of the system. And I've got questions, and I wish I knew who the reviewer was, and I wish we could discuss much more about it, because we academics, we usually claim something, and maybe we don't go that much into original primary sources. So I looked really at the treaty from the 17th century. Nowadays, because of the digitalization, you do have the access. And actually, the Westphalian system, that's not only one treaty, several treaties, but from the narrower sense, there are two very important treaties. The first one is among the Holy Roman Empire and Sweden, and within Empire, princes of the Holy Empire, and then the France. What is very important, and why I claim that was the beginning, is the fact that the ratification was necessary from all the parties, not only from the part of the emperor and Swedish or French emperor. And that's why all the princesses, the list is very, very long. I've chosen only one part of the treaty, that ratifications of very superior. That was the era when all those diplomatic convoys were sent, all those ratifications were necessary. So it was not enough to get the consent of the emperor. It was not enough to get consent from the Pope. All the ratifications were important. And for me, as an academic, that was the sign of sovereignty principle. Because how do you distinguish a state from other units within the international system? Externally, they ratify international treaties. That's one of the well-known aspects and usually seen aspects of the sovereignty principle manifestation. So that's why I reformulated my claims within the chapter, but I still claim that the existence of a state, as we understand it nowadays, was the authority to govern territory and population of the territory. It is the emergence of the system within the 17th century. It was not the beginning as such, because even before again, for students, wars are usually, and unfortunately, material source of international law. You must have heard about Augsburg Peace from 16th century, Cuius regio eis religio, and afterwards Westphalian treaties that had to be ratified independently from the ecclesiastical state and the emperor. And afterwards, it is usually so, there are very important people who think a lot about the world and what is happening around. And you must have heard about Hobbes and his Leviathan, Locke and his treatise on government, and also, of course, Rousseau and his Contrat social. And all these very important political works about the power and manifestation of that power within international treaties and customs. It means what states do and what they say. And it is actually the topic of these days as well. What states do, what they say, especially their representatives. Moving further, I've claimed that the principle has not changed in itself, but the understanding has changed. Because when you say that somebody is a sovereign, it is not only about their rights, it is also about the responsibilities. And as such, as a lawyer, I distinguish legal and functional sovereign equality. During my previous presentation, during the first conference, I've introduced the Wimbledon case, the case decided by the Permanent Court of International Justice, who said that becoming a party to a treaty is not a limit to sovereignty, but the manifestation. And that's the way how I see the treaties. And how I can see that also within the UN Charter, from the theory of international law, of course, why we have international organizations, because states just have to cooperate. They are not independent. They have never been independent. I'm not talking about a legal point of view, but about practical aspects of cooperation. And for the exam, you would have known that the UN Charter within the second article claims that the organization is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all its members. What does, however, this principle mean in practice? In practice, I think that you have to distinguish legal equality as a starting point and then practical equality as a result. And that's the difference that I differentiate within my chapter as well. Because again, member states of all the international organizations, they do have rights and responsibilities at the same time. What does that mean for the UN? For the UN and legal equality, everybody knows, General Assembly, one state, one vote. What does that mean for practical equality? Equality as a result, you have Security Council based on power asymmetries and on the well-known veto power. The reasoning is well known as well, although not acknowledged that much these days. In 40s, it was a great idea after the collapse of the League of Nations to create another international organization where all the powers would be within a club. And to have somebody within a club is much more important than to claim that is not actually possible, that all states are of the same weight. It means that you expect something else from Slovakia and you expect something else from, let's say, Germany. Because economics are different, because cultures are different, because commitments are different, because declarations are different. What I would like to say that the reasoning behind the establishment of the system was understandable in 40s. It is less understandable these days when the system does not work. When the body that is primarily responsible for international peace actually does not work. Nevertheless, within the chapter, I've included also some examples how the system works, at least a little bit, to give positive approach. For example, the Commission was finished its work because it was so much politicized, and the Council on Human Rights was established to include into reporting all the states from the system. I've also included examples of the practice when sovereign equality actually does not work, not even in cases of humanitarian crisis. When UN representatives had to apologize for the inaction of the UN because Rwanda at that time, it was claimed it had very strong opposition towards the actions of the UN. The UN had the power, but did not act. I've included Yemen as well after 2015. Also another approach, different approach to sovereign equality within the UN system. And maybe the last example, apart from the current Ukraine situation, Myanmar as well. Very strongly opposed to any action because of sovereignty. And the best example, as for practice of the principle of sovereign equality in the UN, is the comparison of Iraq and Russia. It's the best example for my seminars because what happened in the 90s, after the invasion of Iraq into Kuwait, within for international law, few hours, and what happened after February 2022, when Russia crossed the borders of another independent state. The first case is a perfect example how the Security Council should act, how Pacta sunt servanda is applied, and another example because of the permanent member of the Security Council, how it is not working, and it still has not been working several years. It doesn't mean the Security Council does not work. There are very good resolutions in other areas, but as for this manifest violation of UN principles, that's the perfect example how Security Council does not work. It does not mean that the principle is not working, is not being applied. It means that the basic principle of Pacta sunt servanda is not applied. So what I wanted to point out is not that the principle as such is badly verbalized, but the fact that the basic principle of the governance, not only of interstate relations, but also within human community, is not applied. And then the final part was about international organizations and their member states. Are they complementing each other? Are they competing actors? I haven't included a competence issue because, as far as I know, it's another chapter and it concerns much more the judicial bodies. I've included the issue of implied powers. Students maybe know much better than my colleagues that do not focus on public international law anymore about one of the first advisory opinion of the ICJ that concerned UN as such and pointed out the concept of implied powers, what the UN as an independent actor and subject from the establishing member states can do and has to do. The question whether there are much more conflicts about organizations and establishing members, and whether there is any way out to get out from these conflicts. And I'm asking about the principles and aims of the functioning of international organizations, and the only way how to get out from here is the proper applicability of Pacta sunt servanda. As for the issue of loyalty within application of Pacta sunt servanda, I think that was actually the final slide of the presumed first presentation was that the loyalty, I presume that my colleagues will discuss much more within their presentations. So thank you very much.